Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about self-care. But before we hop into today's episode, I gotta ask y'all, how often are you just getting by? Surviving, running on empty, exhausted? If your answer is a little more often than you'd like to admit, well, you're going to find a lot of peace over the course of this month. We're going to be talking about more than just bubble baths and pedicures. We're going to be diving into what self-care really looks like so that you can engage in your life in a way that leaves you feeling nourished on every level. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt. Here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey guys, it's Mary, and I'm really excited because today is the first episode of the new month's topic, which is all around self-care. And if you know me, you know I'm all about some self-care. This is like a topic that I am excited to dive into. It's kind of a short month. We've only got 3 episodes devoted to self-care, and I want to get right into it because I don't know if it's just this time of the year or life is just getting crazier and crazier, but I feel like everyone I know is on some form of the burnout circuit, and people are sharing with me how exhausted they are, how they're wanting to throw in the towel, and it's feeling a little heavy out there. Can I get an amen? I don't know. I'm actually quite excited about life right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have been prioritizing my self-care recently. And it's not something that I've always done. In fact, the reason that I do the work that I do, the reason that I talk about living fully alive is because for me, there was a very long, decade-long season where I did not do that. And it cost me pretty much everything in my life. I got to the point where I was very, very sick. I had insane emotional imbalance. I was having panic attacks all the time. I was just so anxious, y'all. I mean, it was like I wasn't paying attention to my body. I wasn't taking into account what was creating and causing all of the anxiety. I wasn't paying attention to my emotions, how it was showing up for me. And I lived a life where I was basically buffering and numbing my way through my very existence, whether it was drinking or overeating or just checking out mentally. And it left me with a life that I hated ultimately. And I ended up getting divorced, as you guys know. I gained a ton of weight. I was very, very physically sick. I had autoimmune stuff going on. I had a lot of physical pain, a lot of emotional, hormonal imbalance. I was a wreck. And I really attribute that to, if I boiled it all down, to my lack of self-care. I wasn't taking care of myself. And I kind of thought that, all right, if I kept stuffing it, if I kept sort of ignoring it, being in this place of denial, eventually it would just go away. And it just fed into that part of me that thought, well, maybe even if I externalize it, maybe if I start taking care of the people in my life more and more and more and give more and give more and give more, somehow that would right itself. And it didn't. It did not right itself until I slowed down and really addressed what was going on in my life. When I really addressed the deep wounds that I had and started prioritizing myself, started to get to know myself, started to learn what I needed, started to learn what made me come alive, and ultimately learned how to move out of a state of codependency, move out of a state of hustle, and trying to earn love. And through this journey of living fully alive, it brought me to a place where I truly love my life, but it really begins and ends with self-care. And I think as women, we deal with this, I think, God, in such a hard way, because there's such an expectation for women to be able to juggle so much, juggle a career, juggle parenting, juggle taking care of our bodies, kind of what I like to call the third shift, which is our beauty regimen. So we've got our first shift, our second shift, and our third shift, which is our beauty regimen. So we're taking care of our own business or working for somebody else. We're taking care of our family, and now we have to make sure that we look great doing it. And so it's a lot of pressure, honestly. And I feel like for women, we tend to always be the last one on the list. We sort of get the scraps of the day and we say yes to everyone and everything else. And we're constantly saying no to ourselves. And then, of course, there is the lovely little guilt that we feel that we, after all of that, still haven't even done enough. And I know that I'm not alone in this. I mean, I hear my one-on-one coaching clients talk about this all the time, especially this time of year. These are some of the things that they've been saying to me this week that, I've heard, I feel like I should have done more this year. We can't, one of my girls, my client, she said, why can't I stay in my diet or my routine through the holidays? And then somebody else said, I'm nervous about pictures, family photos coming up. I feel gross and exposed where everybody else is feeling beautiful. What's wrong with me? Oftentimes I hear things like, I just feel sad and defeated about it all. I should have lost that baby weight, or I feel embarrassed because I was typically doing the things that I do. I help too much, I give too much, and then I burn out and I yell at everybody and I get angry and I'm exhausted. And so there is a sense, especially this time of year when we're sort of beginning to reflect on the previous year, kind of planning for next year, that there is this judgment that we should have done more, that we should have been more, accomplished more, changed more. And I feel like with all of this criticism, with all of this judgment, we have all of this pressure on ourselves. It's like, what we need is the opposite of the pressure. What we need is the opposite of the shame. What we need is to feel comforted and reassured that we are okay, that we are not royal screw-ups, that we're still loved. What we really need, to me, is gentleness, extra tenderness. And we actually need some real self-care. And I'm not just talking, getting some chocolate or taking a bubble bath or buying yourself flowers, although sometimes those things are great. We need real nurturing. We need to remember our strength. We need permission to slow down and take care of ourselves. We need to slow down and ask ourselves, what is it that we need? And what I find is that in my clients especially, and I know this has got to be true for you guys too, because it shows up in my life as well, is that we have these blocks to offering ourselves self-care, giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. And I find that it kind of boils down to 3 blocks. Hey y'all, I just wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. I know that emails get lost in your spam folder, so subscribing means my episodes come right to your phone. So go ahead, hit that quick little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of the Living Fully Alive episodes. Plus, in addition to subscribing to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I don't know if you know this, but I have been releasing guided meditations every Monday over on YouTube, and you're not going to hear them here. So if you've been wanting to start an easy meditation practice, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on my short 15-minute guided meditations. All right, now back to this week's episode. And these show up sometimes all together, sometimes just, one of them will be more prevalent in somebody's life than another. But I find that when we aren't taking care of ourselves, when we aren't prioritizing self-care, here's the reasons why. Number 1, I think that we don't take care of ourselves because we don't have an identity outside of our contribution to other people. I'm going to say that again. We don't have an identity outside of our contribution to other people. Now, typically, this would be described as like the empty nest syndrome, where you've taken all your time and you've nurtured your children and you've raised these beautiful children and they leave, and then all of a sudden you're sort of left with yourself and you don't know who you are, and you've taken care of everybody else, and here you are going, well, who am I? Now that I'm alone, now that it's quiet, who am I? But I think that it's not just the empty nest syndrome that where this happens. I see this all the time. I mean, I don't have children, and this was something that was very true for me, even without taking care of my own children. It is so common for women in particular to prioritize their contribution to other people and use that as part of their identity, part of how they self-identify. And we don't slow down to get to know ourselves. So it's kind of like the opposite would be this sort of sense of independence, this individuation. And instead, typically what we're living is a life of codependency. Now, Lindsley and I are going to talk more about this next week. We're going to kind of like dive into codependency and how that really becomes a block to our self-care, how that can be a really unhealthy pattern. And I'm excited to talk about that because I am 100% a recovering codependent, y'all. I mean, that's something I literally am in recovery for and go to my meetings and work the 12 steps around codependency. I mean, I am all into it. So I know what this is like. And one of the things that I found, though, is that in order for us to really prioritize self-care, it's like, how can we do that when we don't have a sense of our own self to take care of? How can we practice self-care when we don't even know how to care for our unique self? And obviously, it's so much easier to take care of other people because it's clear. We can see what they need. We can hear it. People ask for it. We can jump in and be the hero. And so we step in and we help everyone else. And of course, the dysfunction of it is that it gets us this hit of affirmation and appreciation. So it makes us feel like we're really doing a good thing. We're really being a good person by taking care of other people. And I'm not, saying don't do that because I am a 2 on the Enneagram. I'm a helper. That is like in my blood. I love helping people. I love, oh my gosh, supporting people. So it's not about that, but it's like, where are we in that mix? What about our person, our heart, our needs? Who are we? Part of our self-care requires that we slow down and get to know ourselves. We have to get to know our needs. We have to learn what we love to do, what fills our tanks back up. Because oftentimes when we think about self-care, when our identity is comprised of our contribution to other people, part of the way out of that is to start learning what it is that fills our tanks back up, what it is that gives us energy, and what it is that we love to do. So oftentimes self-care, can be things like going to a pottery class, taking an art class, knitting, doing things that really are things that we just simply enjoy, that aren't for the benefit of anybody else, but it's just because it makes our hearts come alive. It's what we love. And so we have to create an identity that isn't just surrounded around helping other people. That we have this unique identity that is ours alone, that we can stand alone in our sense of self, and that our sense of self is well developed. We know our interests, we know our hobbies, we know our habits and behaviors and things that we love, things that we don't love, our boundaries, our limits, things that trigger us. And to me, that is a very healthy sense of self. And so part of this block to self-care is when we don't have an identity outside of our contribution to other people. So that's the first block. The second block that I see that happens so often, oh my gosh, and I fall prey to this a lot, and it's something that I have to really be actively paying attention to, because especially growing up in the South, and I think this is not only a Southern issue, I think this is just a female issue, is the second block is saying yes when we mean no, when we want to say no, when we have no more yeses inside of ourselves and we still say yes. And so to me, part of this journey of self-care is learning how to say no, even when it feels risky. Saying no when we're afraid of judgment, when we're afraid of failure, when we're afraid of criticism, and we take care of ourselves, that we know our limits. And one of the blocks is, it's like our default is we just say yes to everything without pausing, without considering, without slowing it down and saying, hey, let me get back to you tomorrow, or thanks so much for thinking of me. Let me take a moment to think about that. And we sort of buffer with our time to analyze, do I have the bandwidth to say yes to this? Do I want to say yes to this? Is this something that would really give to my life? Is this something that I have energy to invest in? And we oftentimes just say yes. We say yes without even thinking about it. And it really is kind of a societal norm of saying yes. And we oftentimes think that if we say yes enough, it's eventually going to give us a life that we love. Like it's going to get us accepted. It's going to give us love. It's going to give us attention. But in reality, saying yes, especially when we really want to say no, it often, if not always, takes us away from the life that we really love, because the result ends up being burnout, which is, in my opinion, a modern day epidemic, which is causing all kinds of symptomatic issues, including the deterioration of our health, our marriages, our bodies, our relationships, basically maybe everything in our lives except for our career. But if you think about it, if you slow down for a minute, it's like when you say yes, and you don't slow down and pause to think of the consequences, the emotional, the physical, the just like general toll that it could potentially take on your life. It's like, oh man, that is taking away from a life that is the life that you want, the life that you would love. And I don't know if you guys have read the book called Thrive by Ariana Huffington of Huffington Post. She is amazing. It was a book that I read probably 7 years ago now. And I remember it was just one of those light bulb moment books. I'll link to it in the show notes. But I highly suggest you pick up a copy because it really gets into redefining what success is and incorporating this idea of your well-being. This idea of not just success is not just accomplishing or doing more or achieving, but it really is being able to thrive in your life. Okay, so she says, Marie Asborn, professor of the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, describes burnout as an exhaustion funnel. We slip down as we give up things we don't think are important. Often the very things we give up are those that nourish us the most, but seem optional. The result is that we are increasingly left with only work or other stressors that often deplete our resources and nothing to replenish or nourish us. And exhaustion is the result. That hopefully is a wake-up call, right? It's like that is what burnout is. It's this exhaustion funnel where when we start saying no to the things that really make us come alive, the things that seemingly are kind of like seemingly unimportant, like, oh, I can get by without going on that walk. It's not important. Like it's not something that I have to do. Or, I don't have to sign up for that pottery class that I love. Like I can cross that off the list. It's not that important. Or just taking time to read a book or your meditation practice in the morning. These are usually the things that we cross off in order to get the things that we think we're supposed to get done finished. And in reality, it's costing us our lives. It's creating exhaustion. It's creating burnout where all we have left are the very things that are just depleting us more and more and more. And the scales become so unbalanced. And so Anne Lamott, phenomenal author, she says, radical self-care means that I gently bust myself out of the desperate, lifelong need to please. And it means that I start to say no as a complete sentence. Ooh, y'all. No is a complete sentence. So often we think we have to say, I'm so sorry, I can't do that, and here's all the reasons why, and we feel like we have to have great excuses. In reality, the boundary of no is a complete sentence. No with a period right after it. We don't have to explain ourselves. We don't have to tell people that we've got all these other things going on or that we're working on prioritizing our self-care or any of it. We can simply say no with a smile, no thank you, whatever that looks like. But it's really getting out of this desperate, lifelong need to please. So moving away from saying yes when we mean no, and exercising our power to say no so that we can say yes to the things that really fill up our tank. Okay, so that's the second block, saying yes when we mean no. The third block to our self-care, oh, this is a deep one, y'all. We don't believe we deserve it. Ugh, I hate this freaking lie. Oh my gosh, I hear this so often from women, that somewhere we were fed this belief that self-care is selfish, that everyone else's needs should come before our own, that somehow being a woman means that we take care of everyone else first, and then we take care of ourselves. I mean, that is why literally they had to tell you to put on your oxygen mask on an airplane before assisting other people and children. Y'all, they have to tell us that because what would we do if we weren't reminded of that? I mean, hello, you guessed it. We would put on everybody else's mask before we put on our own. It breaks my heart because we have bought into this lie that taking care of ourselves is selfish, when in reality, it couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, self-care is, to me, the most selfless thing that you can do. Because I really do believe in living in community. I believe in helping one another. I believe in supporting one another. I believe that we are stronger together than we are by ourselves. And I want to invest in my community. I want to give back. I want to love on my friends and be there and answer their calls when they're in distress and all of that. But I know that I am no good, literally no good. I mean, well, that's probably a little harsh. I'm still good. I'm still good regardless. But my ability to listen and hang in all of that, my ability to hold the space, my ability to love on, to offer wisdom or advice is greatly reduced when I'm not taking care of myself. And in fact, oftentimes when I get myself in a cycle of burnout, then I'm needing everybody else to take care of me. I am crying on the floor. I'm a heaping mess. I've got, mascara running all down my cheeks. And, that is not my best moment. But what's amazing is that when we can release this belief that we've got to be superwoman, that we should have it all together, that we've got to be able to keep up with all of it, and we say, you know what? Above all, I'm going to take care of self. That is when we can really enter into this beautiful giving and receiving with other people in our lives. Because otherwise, when we're depleted, when we really buy into that belief that we don't need it, we're just, I'm fine, I don't need that. That we're kind of above self-care, that destructive belief, it robs us of the joys of life. It robs us of the ability to receive and then the ability to give. And so I think that really we've got to shift this internal belief from, I don't believe we deserve it, that self-care is selfish, to self-care is selfless, and self-care should be a non-negotiable in our lives. And then to me, I really believe that we cannot afford to keep pushing our self-care to the very last thing that we do. This is how we create a life that we secretly hate, a life where we feel resentful most of the time. Anybody else? Can I get an amen? A life where we live exhausted, a life that doesn't satisfy us on any level. So that is why self-care has become a non-negotiable in my life. So the 3 blocks are: we don't have an identity outside of our contribution to other people. We say yes when we mean no, and we don't believe we deserve it. So let's take a moment now that we kind of understand those blocks, and let's check in for a minute. Because to me, we have to pause, because if we're going to move forward and shift how we are showing up in our lives, we have to kind of know where we're starting. We have to admit the hard truth of where we are right now. We got to look at sort of this deficit of self-care. Because once we sort of have this diagnosis, then we can move forward with the medicine, with the antidote that we truly need to begin to feel like ourselves again, to feel like we are a whole being again, where we can truly thrive in our lives. And so I want to have you answer this question for yourself. If I gave myself permission, I feel deprived of, and then fill in the blank. If I gave myself permission to feel, I feel deprived of. Do you feel deprived of sleep? Maybe emotional support, time to yourself. Maybe you feel deprived of physical energy. Maybe it's companionship or intimacy. Maybe it's being deprived of peace or hope or physical touch. So if we can just kind of slow down and take inventory of where we are, because this is showing us where we're going to need some extra self-care, some extra love, some extra tenderness, some extra nourishment. When we can identify where there is this deficit, then we can begin to pour back into ourselves in the exact way that we're going to need it. So if I gave myself permission, I feel deprived of. And as we begin to look at our own life and start thinking about how often we are existing in survival mode, like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being not very often, you're just kind of like really cranking it, you're doing great, you're full of energy, full of abundance, full of life, to a 10 being you're in total burnout, exhaustion, numbing, survival mode. Scale of 1 to 10. 1 being you're not in survival mode, 10 being you're in absolute, total, red zone survival mode, where you're feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, unhappy, and sort of just giving yourself permission to admit where you are there. And my guess is most of us live above the 5 on that scale. Most of us live in medium to extreme survival mode. And that's sort of the way we live. That's kind of the American way, to sort of always be championing this idea of burnout, hustle, 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 say yes, add other things on your plate, make sure you're juggling it all. And so depending on how large this deficit is, how deeply you need some extra love, some extra nourishment, that's where we can begin to look at self-care like the antidote. But I want to take a minute and define what self-care means to me. And I'm going to start with what it's not, because we got to define it, because I think that the misperception is like that it's just sort of these self-indulgent ways of spending money and spoiling ourselves. And so here's what it's not. Self-care is not another way to numb and check out of a life that you hate. So if you are drinking a glass of wine or taking a bath or eating chocolate cake as a way to escape feeling miserable, that is not what I would call total self-care. I mean, sure, all of those things are wonderful. I love them all. I indulge in them regularly, but that is not going to make up for real burnout when you're doing it to escape misery. There is this quote from Emil Niazi. I hope I'm saying that right. You'll see it on the show notes. But it says, the act of self-care has become yet another thing women are expected to be good at. Did you use the right filter for that gram of your impeccably prepared acai bowl? Are the candles you just lit in your Snap story made from organic hand-poured soy, or are they mass-produced factory shit? And how can we stem the inevitable capitalist tide from turning something as simple as self-care into yet another thing to be bought and sold? These are all the things I wrestle with as I order Domino's and sweatpants under the guise of being good to myself. I love that so much. Just adding a little humor to it, because I think sometimes we think of self-care, it's like, what's going to make a good Instagram post? Let me commercialize self-care, make it look pretty, make it look good, when in reality, that's not really self-care. Because what it's doing is it's adding on another thing of our to-do lists to be good at. Another thing we've got to get right. Another thing that we've got to make sure is quote unquote perfect and photographable and curatable. But self-care isn't just about treating yourself. It's not just about buying yourself new stuff that makes a good Instagram photo. It's not about just getting a pedicure or binging on Netflix so that you can feel the rest of your life is tolerable. It's not a temporary fix to just get you through. And don't get me wrong, it can include those things on occasion, but real radical self-care is deeper than that. So here's what I believe that self-care really is. Self-care to me is about making the hard decisions that nurture your soul in a way that eventually creates a life that you love. At the end of the day, for me, it's about being a good parent to yourself. It's about making choices for yourself that give you a life that you really love versus one that you feel like you're constantly having to escape from. It's about taking care of yourself, your whole self, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and the physical self, the holistic self. It's not about giving yourself a reward or numbing out from a hard day. It's truly taking care of yourself. It's tending to the soul, to the little girl inside of yourself. It's about making decisions for your long-term wellness. Brianna Waste, she writes, it means being the hero of your life, not the victim. It means rewiring what you have until your everyday life isn't something you need therapy to recover from. It is no longer choosing a life that looks good over a life that feels good. It is giving the hell up on some goals so that you can care about others. It is being honest, even if that means you aren't universally liked. It is meeting your own needs so you aren't anxious and dependent on other people. So to me, and I kind of feel like that's a mic drop moment, quite honestly, because to me, self-care is going to look like having good boundaries. It's going to look like saying no. It's a lot of times self-care is looking like disappointing people. Sometimes good self-care looks like letting yourself be human, letting your house stay messy, not doing the laundry or the dishes. Sometimes it means going to bed early versus sedating yourself with more Netflix. It might mean letting yourself cry in the car and decide that, you know what, you actually can't go into the party. Sometimes good self-care means letting yourself skip the workout. Sometimes it means having a cookie. Sometimes it means having a salad. Sometimes it means having a glass of wine. But to me, it's taking care of the self. It's not things that just try to put a Band-Aid over the fact that you feel so deprived or you feel so depleted or so unmet in your life. And so you're just going to drink to cover it, watch to cover it, shop to cover it, get the pedicure to cover it, take the bath to cover it. No, it's about taking care, tapping into what it is that you truly need in this moment. As Tara Barack would say, asking yourself, what is asking for my highest attention right now? That to me is self-care. It's like almost in a way treating ourselves like little kids. Like I said, reparenting ourselves, feeding ourselves when we're hungry, not skipping meals, drinking when we're thirsty. When we're tired, letting ourselves rest. When we're feeling like we need to be in a little cocoon, not pushing ourselves to go out and be sociable. These are ways that we can truly take care of ourselves. Lisa Page Rosenberg from Huffington Post, she says, self-care does not have to look like an impossibly expensive spa day or running away to join an ashram, although that doesn't sound so bad. It's saying no to one more obligation. It's letting the dishes sit and reading a book for a few minutes. It's a tiny bit of whatever makes you feel more like you and your favorite version of yourself. And so when I think about self-care, I think about it as a spiritual practice. It really is a pause. It's a tuning in. Self-care allows us to be present. It allows us to take care of others in a way where we don't get resentful or angry or burn out. Self-care helps us live a life where we foster our well-being. So, my dears, this is the invitation, is what are you going to make a self-care non-negotiable in your life? I want to just take a minute to pause to intentionally decide on ways where you're going to take care of yourself. So in a second, pause this podcast, jot down 5 ways that you can radically take care of yourself. And I mean that, like grab a pen, grab a paper, do it on your phone if you want to, because this is where we go from being reactive to being intentional for our lives, where we hear something that we're listening to, like this podcast, And then we actually take the step to create change in our lives. And so I want to invite you to make a commitment to yourself of self-care. Maybe it's saying no more often. Maybe it's deciding that one of your self-care non-negotiables is not working on the weekends or shutting off at 5 p.m. no matter what. Maybe it's breaking a commitment that you made. Like maybe it's going to somebody and saying, hey, actually, I know I committed to this, but I actually can't help out anymore. Or maybe it's saying yes to calling a therapist, making an appointment, and making that a non-negotiable self-care action, going to therapy once a week. Maybe it's prioritizing some time for a new hobby. Or maybe it's only drinking 2 glasses of wine a week instead of 5. Kind of working on the numbing that's going on. Maybe it's about committing to going on a walk in the evenings to decompress from the day. So ask yourself, what do you need? What kind of self-care non-negotiable do you need to allow your tank to be refueled so that you don't end up in that state of burnout? So pause it. Pause this podcast. Come back to it in a second. Pause it. Jot down those 5 ways that you can radically take care of yourself. Because if we do not choose our own life, someone is going to choose it for us. Everybody else has an agenda for our lives. And if we get stuck in the habit of saying yes, thinking we don't deserve to take care of ourselves, and really creating an identity around just our contribution to other people, we're going to wake up realizing that we're not living our life. We're living somebody else's agenda for our life. So living a life where we're fully alive requires intention. It's not going to happen by accident. It requires that we prioritize self-care. And one of my favorite quotes from Danielle Laporte, she says, "Settling for crumbs doesn't keep you fed. It keeps you starving." And y'all, I don't want you to starve. I don't want to starve. I know that for me, I want to live a rich life, one where I have energy and vitality, one where I can, out of a place of abundance, enter into my relationships with love and grace and reserve of energy. A life where when I say yes, it's a hell yes. I enjoy the yes. I'm in. I'm glad to be in. A life where I get to pour into my work with inspiration and not stress. A life where dinner can go on for 2 hours without there being anxiety. A life where I can listen and be present in my conversations with the people that I love. And this is only possible with good, radical self-care. This is only possible with uttering a lot of no's. This is only possible when I take time to nourish myself. This is only possible when I rest and when I have strong boundaries. And this is a life worth living. So my encouragement to you is to prioritize those self-care non-negotiables, to allow yourself to get honest with where you are so that you can begin to see how you can pour into yourself, to nourish yourself so that you can truly live a life that lights you up, that is in service to other people from a place of abundance, and one where you are thriving and fully alive. So y'all, join me next week in my conversation with Lindsley. We're going to talk about codependency and all kinds of other amazing things as it relates to self-care. So join us next week. But until then, remember that the purpose of life is to be grateful, to be great, and to be full. All right, I will see y'all next week. Bye. If you love today's episode, make sure to share it with your girlfriends and invite them into this month's topic of self-care. And if you want to keep the discovery journey going of living more fully alive, check out all my past episodes from the podcast over at maryhyatt.com/show. Plus, you'll be able to grab the show notes for this episode along with the essential oil recipe of the month. Again, that's maryhyatt.com/show. See y'all next week.